While my wife was on a business trip, I decided to surprise her by flying with our kids. I love my wife. I always believed surprises were a way to show love, a way to remind someone that they're missed, valued, and thought of. So, when my wife left for a week-long business trip, I figured what better way to show her how much we missed her than by flying out with our kids to surprise her. It was my idea, born over breakfast. Our daughter sat quietly, poking at her cereal, while our son was lost in whatever game had his attention. The house felt emptier without her, quieter in a way I wasn't used to. We missed her. I missed her. So I said it, the idea coming out before I could second-guess myself. What if we went to see Mom? My daughter's eyes lit up. Like, just show up? Yeah. I smiled, setting my coffee down. We can book flights today, be there tonight. Imagine how surprised she'd be. Even my son, who rarely looked up from his screen, glanced at me and shrugged. That'd be kind of cool. And coming from him, that was as close to enthusiasm as I could hope for. Within hours, we were packed and ready. The excitement in the house buzzed like electricity. I could already picture the moment. Her opening the hotel door, eyes wide in shock, arms pulling us in for a hug, maybe even a tear or two. We hadn't had a moment like that in years. Life had gotten busy, work, the kids, routines that left little room for surprises. But something tugged at me even before we left. A small, quiet thought that I pushed aside. She hadn't answered my call that morning. Not unusual, really. Work trips could get busy. Still, I had texted. Something simple. Hope work's going okay. Just wanted to hear your voice. No response. An hour later, I tried again. Kids miss you. Call when you can. Still nothing. I convinced myself it was nothing. She was probably just caught up in meetings. No big deal. We were about to give her the best surprise of her life. We landed in Chicago just after sunset. The city's energy hit us the moment we stepped off the plane. Bright lights, honking horns, the rush of people moving with purpose. The kids were buzzing, laughing as we picked up our rental car and drove toward the hotel. I didn't call her. I wanted it to be a surprise. That was the whole point, right? But as we got closer, an unease I couldn't shake started to settle in. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 9:43 p.m. Not that late. Maybe she was asleep. Or maybe she was busy. I brushed the thought away and focused on the road. When we pulled up to the hotel, I turned to the kids. Wait here. Okay? I'm going to check us in. Are we going to jump out at her? My daughter asked, practically bouncing in her seat. I forced a smile. Yeah, we will. But first, let me take care of the room. I walked to the check-in desk, still carrying that vision of the surprise in my head. The receptionist smiled as I approached. Hi, my wife is staying here. I wanted to surprise her. Could you tell me her room number? I kept my tone light, casual, like this was just a fun family moment. She gave me an apologetic smile. I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out room numbers for guest privacy. Of course, I said, sliding my card over. Can you at least call her and let her know her husband is here? She nodded and dialed. I watched her face closely, more nervous than I wanted to admit. She waited, listened. Then something shifted. Her eyes flicked toward me, cautious. She's not answering. I felt a pulse of something sharp, but I kept my smile. Maybe she's asleep. The receptionist hesitated, eyes scanning the screen in front of her. It says she checked in with a +1. The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked. Sorry, what? She listed another guest with her when she checked in. Felt like the air around me had thickened. I stared at her, searching for some explanation that made sense. A +1, I repeated. The receptionist nodded, clearly uncomfortable. I just assumed you knew. I laughed. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all. Maybe it was the part of me that couldn't believe it, wouldn't believe it. I laughed because what else could I do? But inside, everything was cold. Right? I said quietly. I'll need a room, please. She nodded quickly, avoiding my eyes as she typed. A minute later, I had a key card in my hand. Same floor as my wife's room, just a few doors down. Perfect that I walked back to the kids, plastering on a smile that felt like it didn't belong to me. We're all set, I said. Let's drop our stuff off first. Upstairs, the hotel room was unremarkable. Clean, quiet, but I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about 4 doors down. Get comfy, I told the kids, keeping my voice light. Order whatever you want from room service. They didn't question it. They didn't see the way my hand shook when I picked up the hotel key. They didn't notice the way I lingered by the door that I stepped into the hallway alone. The carpet muffled my footsteps, the kind of silence that feels heavy. The kind that makes you feel like you're walking toward something inevitable. That I stopped in front of her door. Room 814. My hand hovered over the wood for a long second. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was nothing. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. I stood there, my hand balled into a fist, before I pulled out my phone. One last shot. I sent a text. I'm here. Open the door. The message was marked as read, but there was no reply. Nothing. Just silence. I could have walked away. I could have gone back to my kids, pretended this wasn't happening. But something inside me wouldn't let me. I turned, walked back downstairs, straight to the front desk. The same receptionist looked up, surprise flashing in her eyes. Hey, I said, sliding my key across the counter. I kept my voice calm, steady. I locked myself out. Can I get a new one? She nodded, typing quickly. And, could you add my wife's room to my key? I smiled, casual, like it was no big deal. We always do that when she travels, just in case. She hesitated, but only for a moment. Beep, swipe, click. All set, she said, handing it back. I thanked her and walked back upstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. Back at her door, I stood there for a moment, staring at it, wondering what I was about to find, wondering if I really wanted to know. I slid the key in. Beep. The green light blinked, and then I opened the door. The door opened with a quiet click, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. At first, it was just a normal hotel suite. The same neutral walls, the same sterile carpet, the same generic furniture. But then I saw it. The shape beneath the sheets. 2 figures. Tangled. Close. Too close. My wife wasn't alone. She stirred first, her eyes blinking open, confusion flickering in them before settling into something sharper. Not fear. Not shame. Annoyance. Like I was the one intruding. Like I was the problem. The man beside her groaned, shifting slightly, still half asleep. He hadn't even registered me yet. She gasped then, scrambling to pull the sheets around her, as if that made a difference. As if the damage wasn't already done. What are you doing here? Her voice cracked, eyes wide. I stepped into the room, shutting the door quietly behind me. The sound felt final, heavy, like a lock clicking shut on whatever we had left. I didn't speak at first. I just looked at her, the woman I had trusted with everything, my partner, the mother of my children, and now a stranger. Finally, I found my voice, though it sounded hollow in my ears. Who's he? The man beside her stirred, confusion knitting his brow as he sat up. His face paled as he saw me, his mouth opening and closing like he didn't know how to explain himself, like there was any explanation that would matter. My wife's eyes darted between us, calculating, searching for an escape that wasn't there. This, Jason, it's not. I cut her off with a laugh. Cold, empty. Not what it looks like? She swallowed, clutching the sheet tighter, as if it could shield her from the truth. The man finally found his voice. Look, man, I didn't know she was married. I turned to him, slow and deliberate. My gaze pinned him where he sat. Didn't know, huh? My wife whipped her head toward him. Shut up, she hissed, her voice sharp, but the damage was done. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and choking. I turned back to her. So, how long? She didn't answer, just stared at me, lips parted, as if the right words would magically appear. When they didn't, she looked down, fingers twisting in the sheets. It's complicated. I laughed again. The sound felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. No, it's really not. She looked up then, something cold and defensive hardening her gaze. What are you even doing here? The question hit me like a slap. I took a slow step forward, my voice low, controlled, dangerous. I flew here, with the kids, to surprise you. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening slightly. Shock finally, realization dawning. The kids are here? She whispered. I nodded, slow and deliberate. Yeah, they're down the hall, waiting to see their mom. She flinched then, but not enough. Not nearly enough. You weren't supposed to come, she said quietly, almost to herself. I blinked, stunned. That's what you're worried about? That I showed up uninvited? She said nothing, just looked at me like I was the one ruining things, like I was the one making this harder than it had to be, like this was somehow my fault. I took another step forward, every word like a blade. You were just going to come home, smile at me, hug the kids, and pretend like none of this happened? She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her silence said it all. My hands clenched at my sides, the weight of betrayal sinking deeper with every second. The man, who still hadn't moved, shifted uncomfortably. Maybe I should. Sit down, I snapped, my gaze never leaving her. He froze, like a deer in headlights, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She straightened then, her chin lifting, defiance flashing in her eyes. You don't understand. I stepped closer. Then explain it to me. She hesitated, wavered, and then her shoulders slumped. I didn't mean for this to happen. I stared at her, disgust curling in my chest. But it happened anyway. Silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. Why? My voice broke on the single word, but I didn't care. She looked down, her fingers twisting the sheets, pulling them tighter against her. I don't know. The words felt like a punch, a slow, agonizing punch that left me breathless. You don't know? She shook her head, eyes still downcast. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand the truth. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching the woman I thought I knew crumble under the weight of her own choices. Finally, she whispered, I needed to feel like me again. The words were quiet, but they hit with the force of a sledgehammer. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. And you couldn't feel like you with me? She said nothing, and that was my answer. I took a step back, the distance between us feeling like an ocean. You didn't even think about them, did you? I asked quietly. Her eyes flicked up, confusion marring her features. The kids? I clarified, my voice shaking. You didn't think about them when you made this choice. She flinched then, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like regret. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I shook my head, stepping back again. I came here thinking I was about to give you the best surprise of your life. But it turns out you already had one. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned on my heel, reaching for the door. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. To my kids. To the only people who still matter in this mess. Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I stepped out into the hallway, letting the door click shut behind me. I stood there for a second, breathing hard. The world felt tilted, off balance, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't come back from. And maybe I was. But then I thought about them, about their smiles, their excitement, their innocence. They were waiting for me, just a few doors down, and they didn't deserve this. I couldn't protect them from the truth forever, but I could protect them from tonight. So I walked, each step heavier than the last, but I didn't stop, because no matter how broken I felt, they were still my world, and I wasn't going to let her take that from me too. When I reached our room, I paused outside the door, my hand resting on the handle. I could hear their laughter faintly from inside, their voices light and carefree. They had no idea what had just happened 4 doors down. No idea that their mother had just shattered the world we built together. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, frozen, gathering the strength to walk in and pretend everything was okay. But eventually, I pushed the door open, forcing my face into something that resembled normal. My daughter was the first to notice me. She jumped up from the bed, her face lighting up with excitement. "Did you find her?" Was she surprised? Her little arms wrapped around my waist before I could even respond, her joy so pure it ached. I forced a smile and ruffled her hair. "Not yet, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady, even though every word felt like it burned on the way out. "She was busy, but we'll see her in the morning." She pouted but nodded, her trust in my words breaking me more than any confrontation ever could. My son glanced up from his phone, his eyes sharp. He didn't say anything, but I could see the question there, lingering beneath the surface. He was older. Wiser. Maybe not old enough to know exactly what had happened, but old enough to sense something wasn't right. I needed to get them out. Away from here. Away from the shadow of that hotel room. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. "You guys want to do something fun? Maybe grab some ice cream? Walk around the city a bit before bed?" My daughter's eyes lit up. "Can I get sprinkles?" "You can get whatever you want," I promised. My son studied me, eyes narrowing, but after a pause, he shrugged. "Sure. Why not?" And just like that, the plan was set. I didn't bother unpacking. We weren't coming back. I grabbed my wallet, stuffed it into my jacket, and led them out of the room. We walked out into the cool night, the city buzzing around us. The noise, the lights, the crowds, it all felt distant, like I was walking through a dream. My daughter held my hand, swinging our arms as she skipped beside me, her joy infectious. My son walked a step behind, his hands shoved into his pockets, watching me with eyes that saw too much. I kept walking, kept smiling, kept pretending. We found a little ice cream shop, its neon lights bright against the dark street. The scent of sugar and waffle cones hit me the second we stepped inside, and for a brief moment, it reminded me of simpler times. Times when a trip like this would have been about fun, not escape. My daughter pressed her hands against the glass, eyes wide as she picked her flavors. "3 scoops," I said when the server glanced at me. "She deserves it." My son smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Guess we're all breaking the rules tonight, huh?" I didn't answer. Just paid for the ice cream and found a table by the window. We sat there, watching the world pass by as they laughed and joked, as they devoured their treats with innocent delight. And I pretended. I laughed when I was supposed to. I nodded when they asked me questions. I took bites of my ice cream that tasted like nothing. Because all I could think about was that hotel room. About the woman I thought I knew. About the man who shouldn't have been there. About everything I was about to lose. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was before I even looked. I let it vibrate once, twice, before pulling it out. One new message. Her name flashing on the screen. "Where are you?" I stared at the words for a long moment, my grip tightening around the device. She didn't get to ask me that. Not after what she did. Not after what I saw. I turned the phone off and slid it back into my pocket. My son noticed. His eyes flicked between me and the phone, but he said nothing. Just kept eating his ice cream, slower this time. Thoughtful. Watching me. Watching everything. "You okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet, cautious. I forced another smile. "Yeah. I'm good, buddy." I wasn't. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. We stayed there longer than we should have, savoring the normalcy of it. Pretending it was just another night, just another city, just another family trip. But it wasn't. And it never would be again. By the time we walked back to the hotel, I had made up my mind. We weren't staying. I didn't care about the luggage. I didn't care about the plans. I didn't care about anything except getting my kids away from that place. Away from her. Away from the truth they didn't deserve to know yet. "Change of plans," I said lightly as we stepped into the elevator. "We're heading home tonight." My daughter's eyes widened. "But we just got here." My son frowned, his gaze sharp and knowing. "What about Mom?" I kept my face steady, my voice calm. "Something came up. We'll see her when we get back." My son didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. "Not yet." My daughter pouted, but eventually nodded. She trusted me. She always trusted me. That was what made it hurt the most. When we reached our floor, I felt a chill run through me. She was there. Standing outside our room, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Waiting. My daughter squealed, "Mommy," and ran toward her. I caught her by the shoulders, gentle but firm. "Go inside, sweetheart," I said quietly. Confusion flickered in her eyes. "But just for a minute, okay? I need to talk to Mom." She hesitated but nodded, looking back at her mother one last time before walking into the room. My son didn't move. He stood beside me, his eyes darting between us, sensing the tension. "Take her inside," I said quietly. He hesitated, then nodded, leading his sister by the hand. The door clicked shut behind them, and it was just the two of us. She exhaled sharply, her arms tightening across her chest. What the hell, Jason? I stayed silent, my eyes locked on hers. I wasn't ready for the excuses. The lies. Not yet. You just left, she continued, her voice sharp. Took the kids and disappeared. Do you have any idea how that looks? I laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. Do you have any idea how this looks? Her face twisted, but she didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. Just stood there, arms crossed, like she was the one who had been wronged. You're being dramatic, she snapped. I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. You don't get to tell me how to feel. Not anymore. She flinched. Finally. A crack in the armor. Please, she said, softer this time. Let's just go inside. Talk. Figure this out. I shook my head. There's nothing to figure out. Her eyes shone with something I couldn't place. Not regret. Not sorrow. Just fear. This is our family, she whispered. I let the silence stretch, heavy and sharp. Let her feel it. Let her sit in it. And then I said the words that broke her. You should have thought about that before you got into bed with someone else. Her face crumpled, but I didn't let it shake me. I was done. I opened the door, stepping inside. Before I closed it, I looked back one last time. I'll be filing for divorce when we get home. And then I shut the door in her face. The door clicked shut, and for a moment, I stood there, my back against it, eyes closed, trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on me. The silence in the room was suffocating, but it was better than the words I knew were waiting outside. My hands trembled, my heart pounded, but my mind was clear. This was done. Over. There was no going back. No fixing what was broken. I opened my eyes and turned to find my children sitting on the bed. My daughter's legs swung over the edge, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. My son stood nearby, his arms crossed, his gaze sharp and too knowing for his age. My daughter was the first to break the silence. Daddy, who was that? Her voice was small, hesitant. It shattered me. I forced a smile, one that felt brittle and wrong. Just someone from the hotel, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. She nodded, satisfied with the answer, but my son wasn't so easily convinced. He stared at me, his brow furrowed. It was Mom, wasn't it? The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and inescapable. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words, but there weren't any. Not really. We just had a talk, I said, my voice low, calm, but my son wasn't buying it. His eyes didn't leave mine. Are you and Mom getting divorced? The words hit like a punch, hard and sharp. My daughter gasped, her tiny hands clutching the edge of the bed. No, she cried. Daddy, no. My heart cracked clean in two. I crouched in front of them, trying to keep my voice steady, gentle. Listen, I began, my gaze flicking between them. Mom and I are figuring things out, but no matter what happens, we both love you. That's never going to change. My daughter's lower lip quivered, her eyes brimming with tears. But I don't want you to break up, she whispered, her voice cracking. I gathered her into my arms, holding her tight, burying my face in her hair. It's going to be okay, I murmured, though I wasn't sure if it was true. I just wanted her to feel safe, to believe it for as long as possible. My son didn't say anything. He just watched, his eyes dark and guarded. He wasn't crying. He wasn't yelling. But there was something in his gaze that broke me even more. Resignation. Understanding. Like he already knew there was nothing left to save. Finally, my daughter sniffled and pulled back. Can we just go home now? She asked, her voice small, tired. I nodded. Yeah, sweetheart. We're going home. My son nodded too, though he didn't look relieved. He just looked tired. I stood, grabbed my phone, and booked the earliest flight out. One way. No return. Because we weren't coming back. Not to this hotel. Not to this city. Not to her. When we got to the airport, it was still dark, the sky heavy and gray. My daughter curled against my side, half asleep, her small fingers clutching my sleeve like she was afraid I'd vanish if she let go. My son sat beside me, his hood pulled up, his gaze distant as he stared out at the tarmac. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I knew she was texting, calling, probably trying to control the narrative. But I was done listening. Done giving her control over any part of this. Of me. Of us. My daughter stirred, her voice muffled against my side. Do you think Mommy's going to come home after us? I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I don't know, baby, I said softly, brushing my hand over her hair. She yawned, rubbing her eyes. I hope she does. I didn't answer, because I didn't want to lie, and I didn't want to tell her the truth. But my son didn't hesitate. He snorted quietly, his voice low but sharp. She won't. I shot him a look, but he just shook his head. She didn't care we were here, Dad. She didn't even ask to see us. His words were sharp, cutting deeper than I was ready for. Because he was right. She hadn't asked. She hadn't fought. She hadn't done anything but try to control the situation, to save herself. And when she couldn't, she let us leave without even saying goodbye. My daughter frowned, confusion creasing her brow. Mommy still loves us, though, right? I forced a smile, though it felt wrong. Heavy. Fake. Of course, baby. She'll always love you. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. But it was the only thing she could handle hearing. My daughter sighed, content with the answer, and leaned her head back against my arm. My son, though, just looked away. He didn't believe me. I wasn't sure I believed me either. Our flight was called, the intercom crackling overhead. I stood, grabbed my daughter's small backpack, and turned to them. Come on, I said, my voice steady calm. Let's go home. My son nodded, silent, while my daughter clung to my hand. We boarded, found our seats. My daughter curled against me, her body small and warm. My son stared out the window, earbuds in, but I knew there was no music playing. His eyes were too focused, too sharp. He was thinking, processing. The whole flight, I sat there, staring at the seat in front of me, running it all back in my mind, like some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Her face when I walked in, that look, not of guilt, not of sorrow, but annoyance, like I was the one ruining something perfect, like I was the problem. I clenched my fists, then forced them to relax. It didn't matter. Not anymore. When we landed, it was early. The sky still dark, the world still quiet. I loaded them into the car, the drive home heavy with silence. My daughter yawned from the back seat, rubbing her eyes. Mom's still at the hotel, right? My son glanced at me in the mirror, waiting for my answer. I nodded. Yeah, baby. She's still there. My daughter smiled sleepily. Okay, I'm gonna make her a card for when she gets home. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. That sounds like a great idea. My son looked away, but I saw his jaw clench. He didn't say anything, but I could hear it in his silence. He knew. When we got home, the house felt cold, still. My daughter kicked off her shoes, ran to the living room, already rummaging for her crayons. My son walked slower, his eyes scanning the room, like he was seeing it for the first time. I stood in the doorway, my gaze flicking to the kitchen. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter, cold and untouched. My son followed my gaze and scoffed quietly. Guess you don't have to make her coffee anymore. His words stung, but I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. He turned, heading for the stairs. I'm going to my room. I let him go. What else could I say? I turned to my daughter, crouching beside her. She was coloring, her tongue poking out in concentration. Daddy, how do you spell love? She asked, her voice light, innocent. I swallowed hard. L-O-V, baby. She grinned, her little hands scribbling the letters across the paper. I watched as she wrote a note beneath it. I love you, Mommy. I looked away, my chest aching in ways I couldn't explain. She didn't know. She didn't understand that the card she was making would never reach her mother, that it would sit on the counter untouched just like that coffee mug, that her mother had already walked out of this family long before I caught her. I pulled out my phone. No new messages. She had stopped trying. She wasn't coming back. And for the first time, I let that truth sink in. My daughter looked up at me, her eyes wide. When's Mommy coming home? My breath hitched, but I forced the words out, soft and steady. Mommy's going to be away for a while, sweetheart. She frowned. Why? I swallowed hard. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and they have to figure them out. She considered that, then nodded slowly. But she still loves me, right? My heart shattered. Of course she does. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was hers, and it was enough.